All right, welcome to part 2 of the PoE reveal of the Ultimatum League, which looks badass. We're about to do the Q&A section. That was a lot to process. They have been doing really good at going through and updating the old content. All those old leagues and stuff are going to be much better rewards now. That's going to be great. If you guys need a transcript, you can Dan read in chat and look over the notes. There was a lot of changes. I think I forgot 90% of them because it was too many. It's like trying to fill up a bucket with water, and there's only so much room in that bucket, so the water keeps pouring out the other side as I'm pouring in knowledge. Just keeps escaping. I can't absorb it all. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. It's just you, User Boy. I don't see anything at all. Boom, 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 boom. I like the possibility of the league that just features 4 to 5 the expansion content. It does get a little much. I mean, there is so many things to keep track of. That's one thing they need to address, because every league you have Harvest and Abyssal and Betrayal and now Ritual and Breaches and Delve and Beasts, and it just starts getting to the point where it's just like there's so many, and it's just like I can't keep track of them all. It would be nice if they had some sort of lottery where they okay, this league is gonna have Metamorph and Abyssal and Breach, but they'll all be way more common instead of the very low percent. It would be nice. No, all the leagues are in there still. They're all in there. You could you can't ignore them. It's just that there's a lot of them when you start getting drops for them. Boom, 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 boom. It would be nice if they had a selection, a pool of them, and you would see those pool way more often. Like a lot of League, like a lot of Abyss things, a lot of this, a lot of that, but it's getting to the point where there's just so many. You got so many items, you have so many stash tabs for all the different League items, and it's just like there's so many.
G'day folks, and welcome back to another very exciting reveal and Q&A session with the one and only Chris Wilson. Good morning, Chris.
Hey, thanks for having me.
How are you feeling about the reactions so far?
I'm pretty hyped, actually. That was a lot of stuff to cover, and it was really cool watching Twitch chat.
Yeah, this method of doing the reveals, how are you liking it? It seems like last time, it was jam-packed full of stuff, and there's almost not a second to breathe between different things, so it's a lot to digest.
Yeah, I like this method of showing stuff and getting a chance to discuss it and explain things, and it's quite personal to get a chance to interact with the community about the actual changes as they're announced, as opposed to dumping the information on our website and then reading Reddit. So it's a lot more fun.
Ah, that's good stuff. So I'm going to jump straight into PoE2 things first. Yep. The ones that stood out to me were definitely spears and crossbows. Mm-hmm. Two things that I've been very excited to potentially see in PoE one day. I remember asking years and years ago whether we'd get stuff like spears and crossbows. And it was kind of always maybe, probably not. It's a lot of work to make the animations for new things like that. So how come, what led to the decision to add 2 new weapon types to PoE2?
Well, you mentioned animations, and that's actually part of the reason. So previously, the old way we were creating animations in Path of Exile, with the way the character rigs were set up, just made it really hard to add a lot of new ones. But one of the things with Path of Exile 2 is we can quite trivially add a lot more animations to the characters. And so new weapon types are totally fair game, and we've got some interesting ideas there. And of course, spears and crossbows are both iconic action RPG ones that we hadn't done yet, so it makes sense to put them in PoE 2.
I imagine that new rigging system then makes it easier to make more skills, but also more interesting and dynamic skills potentially.
Absolutely, and this custom animation for each skill, basically. A lot of the Path of Exile 1 skills will use whatever animation is appropriate. Sometimes new animations, of course, but it's often kind of the closest animation we have, whereas in PoE 2, we're pretty much animating everything we can by hand.
That's awesome.
Awesome stuff. Now, chat, we have some pre-prepared questions to give you time to formulate and ask some questions, but do ask questions in chat. We have some helpful people in the background taking questions, which we'll ask after some ones that I've already prepared. So firstly, asking about spears and crossbows further.
What is your favorite Twitch emote?
How many of these are there?
Kappa.
So this is a number that keeps on growing.
Ming
We basically showed you the ones we've got working so far, and we expect that to grow, of course, by release. So we have a reasonable stable for each. In terms of the crossbow ones, for example, there's currently 2 main skills that are built into the crossbows you've seen. We hope to add several more. So there's the Cascade one and Power Shot. There'll be 7 more damage shapes coming. And then in terms of damage types, we showed you 3 types of bolts. And yes, I understand that the sound of changing between them got annoying in the video, but this is something we're experimenting with, and if we keep it in, it will definitely be an option. That's actually an homage to the 2012 Dread movie, so, we find it funny at least. Anyway, there's 3 of those ammo types working in the game at the moment, but we'll clearly add a lot more, and so the exponential number of final combinations will be pretty high.
So did you say like 7 damage shapes?
There's 2 damage shapes currently. That's the Cascade and the Power Shot, and we're looking to add several more. So several rather than 7. But that that could be quite a high number overall. Basically, we want to find ones that fit themes for base types of crossbows, and so ideally the end game crossbows will support several of these damage shapes at quite high skill levels, and so you'll have a lot of choice as to what you want to use in your end game build.
Interesting. This is a pretty interesting distinction between like the damage shapes and the damage types. So I guess this is the first like modular skills like that. Like you could always convert damage types or add different types of damage and stuff like that, but these are the first like skills where effectively they're in 2 separate parts. So the support gems also link to the bolts, the damage type aspect of it, and not the actual damage shape thing, the bolt itself.
Yeah.
The power shot. Gotcha. And that's because of the new skill gem system, obviously, which now grants skills based on the item sockets, and then you sock it into a completely separate menu, which saw some glimpses of there, which I'm really looking forward to seeing how that plays out. Is this concept of like unique weapon skills going to be extended out to other weapon types?
It may do. We're still working out what we're doing with each one of the weapon types, and there's a lot of interesting ideas there. Some of them will probably gain skills, some of them will just have other ways to identify themselves. I'll give you another example. So you know how in Path of Exile at the moment, daggers and claws are basically the same thing, right? They're both dex and they, use similar types of skills and so on. So an example of the small tweak we're making there is that claws will count for unarmed skills in Path of Exile 2. So all of the unarmed builds can now use claws. And if you've ever played, Facebreaker, you'll understand quite a bit of potential there. And so we're trying where possible to make smart decisions with the base types. But of course, if we had to add a lot of work to them to make them unique, then we'll definitely do so.
Wow, okay. I'm seeing a few questions already about kind of like distinctions between PoE 1 and PoE 2 here. People asking things like, does that mean spears and crossbows can't be used in PoE 1?
So that's tricky because it's technically possible to get Path of Exile 2 items on your Path of Exile 1 characters in the end game because of the shared end game nature of it. And so if we don't have animation support for the old character classes, we're still working out what to do there. It's one of the problems we're going to have to solve.
Right, okay. And on that note, I guess, how will we be handling accommodating new weapon types in the existing skill tree as well? It's getting big.
Right. So from a skill tree point of view, we haven't announced what we're doing yet with Path of Exile 2's skill tree. There's going to be some interesting stuff. And of course, it's going to accommodate all the weapon types it supports. It may be that Path of Exile 1 characters and hence their skill tree don't necessarily support the new weapon types, and you have to play a Path of Exile 2 character to get them. But we kind of expect that by the time that Path of Exile 2 is out and ready, a lot of people are going to be choosing to play Path of Exile 2 characters because of the vast amount of new content there.
Kind of like further on the note between PoE 1 and PoE 2, will the existing campaign be like just a direct one-to-one port, or will it be seeing like PoE 2 upgrades applied to it as well retroactively? And for like, I guess, how long will it be supported in the future in that way?
Right. So, 1 second. I just got a note, by the way, on the last question from the team that all of the existing Path of Exile 1 characters are going to be swapped over to use the Path of Exile 2 rigs, which adds full support for using spears and crossbows.
Oh, nice.
So that's information I did not know, which is actually very helpful, and the team have obviously thought of that.
Makes sense.
With regard to the campaign itself, we're incidentally getting upgrades whenever we improve assets that are used in both campaigns. We want, where possible, to take the best of Path of Exile 1 and improve it for Path of Exile 2. And so when we do that, it upgrades it in Path of Exile 1. And so there are also places where we intentionally revamp Path of Exile 1 stuff, like what we did with Lionized Watch. And so the campaign will continue to receive improvements in this way. It's still a fully maintained game. Like, it's a product that we are monetizing and maintaining and, treat with pride and confidence and stuff. But at the same time, we're intentionally putting most of our development efforts into making a new Path of Exile 2 campaign that fixes, perceived problems with the way the Path of Exile works. And so it'll be a bit of a patchwork quilt, I suspect, in a few years, where some of the content will date back to the early 2010s, and some of it will be brand new.
I look forward to seeing how it evolves alongside PoE 2's campaign then. A lot of people noted that the stream showed like kind of slowdown in content in PoE 2, and it was talked about previously that it will be a bit of a pullback in terms of overall game speed. Is that still the case? Where are you looking to kind of pitch the speed of PoE 2 compared to PoE 1?
We want Path of Exile 2 to be a slightly more claustrophobic personal experience, but we understand that when presented with that, players find ways to make their characters go fast, because after all, these games are measured on what items you find, and that's in direct proportion to how many monsters you kill, and that's in direct proportion to how fast you can go. And so, yes, it is a game where people will end up going fast. All of the crazy character builds and more are still possible, so I would rather expect that Path of Exile's speed continues to be a high-speed game once we hit the end game and people get their character builds established. But we still have to try as hard as possible to make it a compelling experience for people that want to play at a normal pace as well. And so while we played at a normal pace through that particular showcase there, it's possible to run through, right? You can, be very smart about which monsters you kill. You can do the whole thing rather quickly if you're a racer. So yes, we're trying to make things a bit slower, but we're not doing it in a way that's going to hurt the spirit of Path of Exile, because we understand how people like to play and we want to support that.
Right. I remember hearing that both campaigns would be roughly similar length, and the new one's 7x compared to 10x. So I imagine things like boss fights and certain encounters and stuff like that will be like more difficult and longer than comparable encounters in the previous campaign then, right?
Yeah, and that's partly because when we were making the mini bosses in Path of Exile 1, it was literally a matter of, let's take a bandit and let's scale it up and give it a name and throw heavy strike on it, and that's a boss, if you see what I mean. Let's take a rower and retexture it and put an aura on, and that's a boss. Whereas here we're planning them into the levels. We think of an idea for a level.
That reap ability looks really cool.
Put in this level, and then
I hope it works good.
And so it means the boss fights are significantly more complicated and interesting. And I don't expect that's going to slow players down a lot, because we're not like throwing vulnerability phases into those mini bosses necessarily. But they're certainly going to be interesting fights at the very least.
And it was talked about making bosses more rewarding as well. Do you think like the average boss in PoE 2, since they're going to be harder, is also potentially going to be more rewarding as well?
We want to make sure the rewards are pitched at a good level there, and the changes to the rewards of bosses in Path of Exile 1 is just making sure it's worth your time actually going and farming them. If you go and do an Act 10 Katava run, we want it so that you actually get some decent items, and it's worth repeating that process when gearing up for maps. Now, of course, it's probably still more profitable to just go and play maps, but some people want to just get themselves ready before they start expending currency on every area they run.
I do have a bit of a nostalgia for like farming Piety and Dominus back in the earlier days of PoE 2, PoE, so I'd be interested to see if there's more of that in PoE 2.
Yeah, Reap looks like sweet, but like way better.
Coming very soon.
It's going to be fun to build that one.
Matarik asks, will Path of Exile 2 be sticking to a 3-month league-based cycle like PoE 1, or is there any intentions to change this at this point?
We're pretty happy with the 3-month cycle. It's a good duration. We haven't decided, obviously, yet, and it depends a little bit on when Path of Exile 2 is coming out and how it works around dates that year. But yeah, we do expect to continue the league cycle, and it will be quite nice actually getting to make the first leagues for Path of Exile 2 and designing those, because it'll be a fresh game where we can find things that integrate really well into it, and that's going to be quite interesting.
I wonder if they'll have another in-game
will there be
that's
any options to like reduce graphics
adjacent to
PoE
maps,
2, since
something
it's
that's an
looking
alternative.
Like a much prettier game. Is it going to be a bit harder on like PC hardware than the current game?
It certainly has higher requirements.
Like you can do maps or this other thing that's
level
in-game.
of detail stuff and various other bits and pieces. And a lot of the engine improvements that have been made over the last few years are with a view to us basically never dropping frame rate and finding smart ways, like the dynamic resolution scaling and various other bits and pieces. If you're IO bound, for example, it uses placeholder textures and so on. And it's a fine balance, of course, between making sure this performs well and always looks good. But the intention is that we can run Path of Exile 2 on a wide variety of systems.
We saw a lot of really nice looking UI improvements in the PoE2 trailers. I especially liked the boss bars and even for separate boss bars next to each other and dynamically changing and stuff like that was really cool. Is there going to be more UI customization in the future for PoE, especially something that's, I guess, bothered me in the past is like not being able to do more customization for things like buffs and debuffs and change which things are displayed and their locations?
I suspect that if we were to make changes like that, we'd look into rolling it into Path of Exile as soon as they're ready. But it's a difficult line between deciding the right place for the players so they can focus on playing versus allowing for customization. And we kind of prefer to just let players get on with playing the game and not allow them to completely change their UI. And this is for a few other reasons as well. From a branding point of view, it's nice if the game looks consistent on each person's computer. And I know that sounds like marketing speak, but it is something where we want to make sure that the game is recognizably a Path of Exile. In addition, from a quality assurance point of view, having it so that there's an infinitely permutable UI, of course, makes it significantly harder for us to test patches. But these are all things we have to balance against the actual usability, and we do like the idea of adding
I
more
guess
QRL
that makes
there.
sense.
From a UI point of view, by the way, I'd encourage viewers to have another look at the UI, like the HUD in the footage we just showed, because there's some interesting technology used there that I'm going to see if they can notice.
Was it the pretty boy around the health bar or something else?
That's one of the many benefits. We're rendering it in 3D now, so there's some very interesting lighting stuff.
Very nice. Yeah, I saw some like interesting lighting changes and some green stuff swooshing over the UI. That might be what you're hinting at, actually, because that's something I noticed, but I didn't know what it was about. Anyway, time to scrub over the VODs. Well, after the Q&A. Bathtub Raccoon is asking basically if we're going to be getting more of the integration of things like trading UIs and stuff like that in game, and also similarly, the ideas that were talked about in the past about having the possibility of transferring items like across instances and stuff like that, cross instance trading.
The change that's most likely to come is an integration of the trade websites into the game client, where people can basically like interact with stuff more easily without actually having to leave the game. And that means that, for example, if you see an item in the in-game trade site browser as such, you can click on it to whisper the person directly without having to copy and paste stuff around. That's more likely as the direction that we're going to go. We've talked about our views on trade for quite a while, about how it is important that there are some barriers to instant acquisition of items in order to encourage players to actually play the game to find items while still being able to trade if they want to. And our views on that are still pretty similar. So we don't expect to, put it this way, if we were going to dramatically revamp how trade works, we'd just do it. We wouldn't wait until Path of Exile 2.
I'd like to talk a little bit about Ultimatum. It's on the surface, it looks quite similar to Ritual, and I heard a lot of people pointing that out. What are the key differences in your mind between Ultimatum and Ritual then?
Well, the similarity that we have here is that it's a in-area combat league where you encounter the encounter and then fight some monsters and get some rewards. And this is as opposed to going on a grand heist or collecting, beasts, for example. And so that's kind of where the similarities end, though, because
Diablo 2 Alpha is very good.
The difference is that Ultimatum gives you a very fine granular control over the difficulty and reward that you're getting. So you have the ability to add up to, I'm going to say up to 10, because that's where it goes in the end game, but usually 6 up to 10 modifiers to the fight that are your choice. You're presented with different options. If you don't want a certain constraint, you just don't have to add that one. And so you're kind of customizing the fight by essentially adding mods that further make it more difficult. And if you're lucky, you'll get an Ultimatum run where the mods don't affect your character in a particularly negative way and you have an easier time. Sometimes you're just fighting through a slog of really hard stuff. And so the rewards escalate kind of exponentially here. Like the intention here isn't that you just make your way through the 6 to 10 rounds pretty easily and get your 6 to 10 rewards and walk away. The intention is it gets difficult and you have to make a choice of actually stopping. And we want it so even good players while playing through the campaign will reach a point where they say, okay, I've just got to take this stuff and leave. I can't risk the next round because there's an actual 50% chance that I'm going to screw it up and lose all my stuff. And so this is the first league that people are going to be failing encounters even if they know how to play the game. And that's because they can choose how far they want to take it. Which is different than Ritual, because in Ritual it's expected that you're going to kill the monsters, you're going to get your rewards. Here, the rewards are a lot better, but will you get them?
I do like those risk-reward
That's
things
nice.
where you get to have a bit more of a gamble. You pointed out like the idea
It's
of
going to be
Evolve
fun and
being
it's going to make
the
lots of great
potential
clips
of loss.
of people risking everything and then
on the note of
dying.
Loss, some of the reward choices were things like put an Exalt in or a stack of Exalt or something and then double it. Woody Carrot actually asks how rare are the doubling the currency ultimatums?
I'm going to ask the team that, guys. How rare are the inscribed ultimatums?
It's around, I think that's pretty variable.
Right. So there's a lot of variety in what they reward. You obviously want the ones that double a lot of currency, but you're generally finding an inscribed ultimatum approximately every 20 maps. I should note, of course, that that number will probably change by the time it's released. We're right now with a week to go, tweaking that number on an hourly basis, basically, as we playtest. In addition, these things are tradable. So it's one of those things where a lot of people, when they get one, are going to say, you put 5 exalts in, get 10 out. Therefore, it's worth up to 5 exalts profit. I'm going to sell it for 4. And then they list it. And then someone else is like, well, that's an easy 1 exalt profit for me to get that and just do it because their character is a god. And so we're expecting a lot of people to just dump them on the economy for sale and a lot of people to just buy these up for easy profits because they know they can handle those mods.
That's going to be nice
a
to
little
sell it for
concerned that
4
you might not have the
exalts.
thing for the ritual, but it seems like every ritual that requires you to put something in is one of those itemized ones that you can prepare for and only run when you have the requirement.
The ultimatums that have a specific thing you have to bring are itemized ones, so you know this is going to require, like, for example, there's some that upgrade a good unique to an incredibly good unique, and so it might say bring this item and get out of Calms or something like that, and therefore you just have to trade for the item when you've got the inscribed ultimatum.
Bring what item and get out of Calms? Sorry, I'm just...
Well, it'll depend. There are pools that it picks from, and so sometimes you'll get ones that are close in value, sometimes you get ones with a big difference in value, and those are obviously worth more.
Oh, so there's actually things like it requires a specific unique that you can hunt down and then put in.
Yeah, that crossbow
usually
does
with a
look
value
fun.
difference between the two that's considerable. But our goal is basically
Putting
it's
some
got the
attack
feeling of
speed
double
on
or
there,
nothing on those kind of
so you
ultimatums.
can fire away faster.
Nice, awesome.
That could be really interesting.
Warass8 asks, will the other skills get reworked?
Is his name
nerfed this time around,
Warass?
or is there any mechanical nerf to existing things?
Is that in reference to regular skills in the core game with the Ultimatum release?
Yeah.
We do have the usual patch notes coming out, but we try to cover basically just new stuff that we were doing with regard to skills. I don't know the extent of the changes to the other stuff. I will quickly check. Guys, regular skill changes. There's some nerfs and a couple of buffs, so
classic.
Seeing what people think about that. But no, I mean, nerfs are obviously for a reason. It's to keep the game good, and we, philosophically on that, we would rather gently nerf things that are right at the top and then have to fundamentally change the entire game to achieve the same balance thing in a roundabout way that players don't notice for a while. So it is a much more direct approach that we're taking these days. If something is just breaking the game through power, we'll cut a little bit off the top. Generally, whenever we do that, we're thinking it's still really good. Why are people so angry? And then they settle down after they've actually used it. So we are trying to make sure that the nerfs are just taking a bit of the power off the top and keeping the thing viable and fun still.
There was a new unique that had like a ton of keystones on it, including one new keystone, which I'm guessing we'll have to wait to see what that's all about, right?
Yep.
Are the other keystones on that item random, or are they set?
They're a set of keystones. This is a group of Vowel keystones that work in interesting ways together, kind of like a puzzle for people to solve. So it'll be quite interesting to see how people work out how to play that character.
So it's like a hand-tailored character build challenge that the devs are putting forward to the community.
Think of it as like a designer's cut version of Path of Exile. This is the true way to play, right?
So CI Eldritch Battery, got it. Very nice. Moving down a little bit. Lexay wants to know, will like map mods affect ultimatums that you find, or I further addendums to that, what sort of things do affect ultimatums?
So guys, what mods affect ultimatums? They're asking about like map mods, for example.
When you run it inside the map, by all the itemized one, described ultimatum, they aren't affected by any map. They just have a bonus to the master game.
Right. So it works pretty much how you would expect. If you're playing a regular map that has mods, then the ultimatum that you find in that map, just a regular one, will be fully affected by the mods. The inscribed ones are their own maps unto themselves, and so they don't have map mods because they're not rollable, but they do have a bonus to make them equivalent to decent maps.
Right. I imagine there's probably going to be some pretty brutal combinations and certain added damage types with certain modifiers that the actual ultimatums in maps give as well, since I noticed there's various things like swords appearing and skewering you.
Yeah, this is very much about actually reading the mods and making sure your character can handle it, right? There'll be ultimatums where you want to get a friend to help because that friend is kind of impervious to whatever it is that's going to make it hard for you. And as we mentioned, we've made party play actually work really well this time.
Playing
as opposed to being
with people.
I'm very excited about that concept actually as well. I've been playing most of the recent leagues co-op with my partner, and yeah, it's a mixed bag. Some leagues are really good for co-op, and others just kind of don't exactly work. So it seems like there's been a lot of thought there. Just to kind of
Socializing.
clarify, each person gets their own separate rewards effectively from the, and they can like tap out and take their reward whenever they want, or they can
Yes,
continue
that's
risking.
correct.
If someone does tap out, can they like stay in the area and help you finish your fight? But they're just like their reward sequence ends. I imagine that's how it
My
works.
understanding is they're teleported outside it. Let me check.
In the regular game, they install.
Right. Okay, so in the regular game, they can still help you out.
But they have to leave the map if it's the inscribed ones, then I'm guessing.
Yeah, how does it work with Inscribe?
Inscribe one only puts the inscription, gets the
Got
gains
it.
the item.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, I guess this was sensible and I should have worked that out. I mean, Inscribed wants that as a specific thing that you're gambling and a specific thing you're receiving. And so that's it's only that occurs, if you see what I mean. So, for example, you and I are sitting there looking at a 5 to 10 Exalt one. And so we're going to come up with 5 Exalts. We're going to put it in the window and we're going to get 10 once, regardless of the fact that there's 2 of us.
Right.
If we want to play it together and make it a bit harder, because there's multiple players, we can do. But it isn't 5 Exalts each.
Yeah, otherwise you'd have a beastery situation again where like every person in the party gets a copy of the beast and then a copy of a copy and stuff like that.
Yes, exactly. Oh, that's scary.
I can see why you went that route then. Decoy wants to know if there is a boss fight in Ultimatum.
Maybe. I mean,
There definitely
watch the
was.
trailer
I
again,
saw it.
guess.
They showed the boss fight. Pay attention.
Swoovles asks, can you just leave the ring? Meaning the Ultimatum ring.
My understanding is that you have to stay within the ring. Is that because it's a barrier or because it terminates
If you're outside the ring for 5 seconds, it's failing.
Right. Okay, so standing outside the ring for 5 seconds counts as failing the encounter.
Oh, so you can dip out for a little bit if you need to catch your
Dip
breath
out.
and use the flask.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting change compared to Ritual then, which had the hard barriers.
And this is also important for hardcore, of course, where when you're going to fail an encounter, it's better to do it by running away than by physically dying and losing your character.
Yep. Often that's the correct decision. Changing tack a little bit to some of the like previous league updates, which was a lot of things that people and myself have been asking for a long time. Excited about veiled mod changes.
Yes.
So the veiled mods themselves are now distinct from the craftable modifiers, and they're more powerful. How much higher are their power level compared to the crafted affixes that they give you?
So the ones that you unveil onto items are almost tier 1 in power. The intention is that they're really punchy, and if you get it, you can build a good item around that. The crafted ones are lower because you get the ability to just add them at will, and so they serve the same purpose. They're just not quite as good as if you actually make the item the correct way. The amount of difference between crafted and unveiled depends a lot on the actual mod. Some of them are closer, some of them are much further away.
Is there any ones that do like different things, like how we have some of the higher tier affixes present some new mechanic or something like that, or is it just generally like here's more physical damage, that sort of thing?
I'll just confirm that.
It's the same thing, really.
Yeah, it's the same thing with numerical differences.
Gotcha. So the veiled chaos orb allows you to reroll an item and gives a veiled modifier on the item as well.
Yes.
And unveiling that, just to clarify, does give you crafting progress as well. So it's a way of unlocking those crafts faster.
Yeah, the Vowel Skills used for crafting and unlocking. Yep, that's correct.
It said earlier in the presentation that the chaos orb drops are part of the core drop pool, right? Not like
Yes.
a betrayal specific thing. Okay,
Yeah.
how common are they compared to like a regular chaos orb?
They're not very common. You want to get them through the betrayal system if you want to target farm them, essentially, but you can find them. And the core drop pool thing is more about the fact that it's worthwhile killing monsters because from time to time you will actually find one. It will be an exciting thing. But like many things in the game, there's a more deterministic way to get them. This is actually a case of we initially really wanted to have it just as a betrayal reward, but I put a strong argument forward that we want the core drop pool to be compelling, and so it was added, but not particularly often. You'll see them, just not as much as you will from betrayal.
Makes sense. Can you use the veiled chaos orbs to put veiled mods on influence bases?
Yes, you can.
Awesome. That's looking forward to some interesting crafting combos here. And can you veil chaos, the character signature mods, like for example, Orion's minus mana cost?
No, you can't get those ones through that.
So those ones are still drop only from those specific characters.
Yeah.
Okay. How many previously league specific uniques are being added to the drop pool?
Way more than the 6 that we listed. It's like 100 or something. Essentially, we looked at all the old league uniques, and there were kind of 2 ways you could get them. You could either get them by fighting content in that league, or you could get them by killing some specific boss. And all the ones that you get from specific bosses, like, Pale Council kind of stuff and so on, that stuff is still specific to those bosses. But every item that you could find by fighting League monsters that would drop because they're a monster of that league is now possible to get in the core drop pool.
Oh, wow.
And so in one swoop, we have
Headhunter?
made Path of Exile's unique pool significantly more interesting in terms of stuff that you can find by just playing the regular game, while still meaning that the old leagues have their interesting rewards.
And exactly how many headhunters am I going to find now?
So this is an interesting one, and the verdict is out on our math, because on one hand, I want to start by saying Headhunter is like clearly in the sights of the balance team of being very unhappy with how powerful this item is, right? And I am putting my foot down and saying, no, Headhunter is an iconic part of Path of Exile. We're not nerfing it. It's going to stay awesome, right? So I'm representing the community here. Headhunter stays great. But the concession here is that we don't want 47% of characters at the top of PoE.Ninja to have a Headhunter equipped. We do want to make sure that it is a valuable item that's actually aspirational. And so part of the compromise here is you can get it in the core drop pool, obviously quite infrequently, but it's also a little bit harder to get from other sources as well. So obviously there's going to be a lot more of them because you can find them from regular monsters, but there's going to be fewer of them from the various other ancillary places you can get them. And so to some extent, this balances out a bit. So randoms are going to be fighting headhunters a bit more than the dedicated players because the deterministic farming of it is harder than it was before. It takes more ancient orb uses, for example. But technically, you can just chance your way into it earlier on without having to be in Nemesis content. And so ideally, we will see Headhunter remaining a completely amazing item because it has not been nerfed and still, being a viable thing for builds.
They're going to mess it up and there's going to be so many.
You actually find one. And we think that's actually quite important in this kind of game because it means that a player who's not as good, not as lucky normally as other players can just luck their way into something that gives them a ton of currency. And players who know what they're doing have plenty of deterministic options for still getting it and deterministic options for raising currency they can use to just trade for one if they need it.
I love the idea of like some first-time player who's level 40-something and they find a headhunter and they just whap it on and be like, this seems okay.
Well, that's like previously it happened with mirrors and it happened with obscure rare items they would never notice, right? But it was so cool watching some random player get something incredibly valuable and it just changes their game experience. And so we've just made sure that there's a lot of other options.
We're going to mess it up and there's going to be so many headhunters everywhere.
Detective Jabsco asks, with the league items that have been changed to global drops, have they lost their league tags? Will you be able to chance them outside of their league now?
My understanding is that you will be able to chance items that because they're just regularly in the global drop pool again. So my understanding is you can just chance a headhunter if you're lucky.
Okay, cool. I'm excited to see the return of the Vowel Reliquary keys. I quite like those. It's sad to see them gone for quite a while. It was mentioned that they are the rarest ever added to the game. How often will we see them? How rare is the rarest
We'll
ever?
find them less often than the previous ones. And our goal here is that they are very treasured things that you find occasionally. We don't want an expectation that people play this league expecting to get a handful of these, right? They're pretty rare. And so it's a thing that you can hope to get. And if you can trade for it, that's also good. But a lot of this comes down to the fact that these ones have a different way of distributing items. In the past, we said, okay, we've got some broken stuff for you guys, like, unnerfed counts and so on in the previous ones. And we're just going to make this fair by making them incredibly unlikely to get. If you watch videos of people opening a lot of past reliquary keys, you'll notice they don't really get the good items that often. There's a bias towards the junk. Even though foily special junk has still got value, of course, because it's a collector's item, it wasn't a particularly fair distribution. With this new Vowel Reliquary key, we're trying a completely flat weighting, so every item has equal chances of spawning. And so while there are some fewer, less valuable items in there, there's also some very valuable Vowel items, especially valuable in foil, and they're equally likely. And so because of this, we're being careful and making sure it doesn't drop particularly often. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the value of these, because we would rather it be a case that even the foily worse items are still worth something from a collector point of view later, rather than just water it down.
I'm going to try and wring a little bit of detail out of you here. Is Headhunter in there? Is there a foil Headhunter?
I don't believe that Headhunter is classed as a Vowel item. So this is all the Vowel items in Path of Exile. There's quite a lot.
I see. Okay. Well, that's a pretty important detail for people that want to kind of do some math on there, because they'll be able to look at whatever's a Vowel item, count them, and then see one in how many you've got of getting specific items.
Yeah, we'll have an EV chart the next day, like with Magic the Gathering sets,
I like both of these men, but
Nice.
they
I
both
look
have
forward to
very
reading
soothing,
some of that
relaxing
detail, seeing what
voices,
things I should be hoping for.
and it's putting me to sleep.
So a big change is to beast
They're
crafting.
both very chill,
in
and it's
particular,
making me
beast
go, "Oh,
item
this is
splitting.
great
And
information."
for those of you who don't really understand or know what that was all about, effectively it was item printer go burr, but people were able to duplicate certain things ad infinitum. So usually stuff like six white socket good chest bases that can then be crafted, or other like crafting stage items that can be finished off. And so groups of people were able to get together, pool resources, craft these bases, and then print them for the rest of the league. So what led to this change to effectively make it so that this can't happen anymore?
Part of it is that when we initially designed the splitting stuff for beast crafting, we knew that there was some base, because with an item there's the base and there's the mods on it, and splitting will wreck your mods generally and copy the base. So in a case where the base is the hard part to get, then the splitting recipe is valuable. And so we knew what valuable bases there were in the game beforehand. It's just that that pool has increased a lot over time, and it's become incredibly abusive with stuff like, watchstones and heist contracts or heist blueprints and so on, and the really good crafted bases for crafting projects. And so this was something we were keeping an eye on. And of course, there are ways of balancing it. We could just make those beasts incredibly rare and so on, and eventually it becomes, a different way of doing a mirror. But we didn't really like that approach. So we started fighting on a specific basis of watchstones and heist blueprints, for example, were quite abusive. So we started toning things down there, but the cases keep cropping up. And so we feel that this change here, where you can still duplicate something one time per item, is probably a sensible way to do it. It means that we're not having to fight it on a beast rarity basis. And it still means it's a viable mechanic where if you are crafting an item, you can potentially make two of it using this method.
It kind of follows the rule of mirroring a little bit, although it does make the original effectively mirrored as well, so that it can't be split again. It can still be changed, though, obviously.
Yeah, it does prevent the cartels from continuing to print many copies of the item, which is a cool mechanic, and I really like that. But the same thing does exist in the game in other ways, like those new vendor recipes that we've added, right? Some of those have some economic impact, right? What if someone finds one of those and doesn't tell people how it's done? They just start making the item you get from it.
That's often
It'd be real interesting to see if certain things spike in value in the trade economy, unexplainably. Hint, hint.
I'm sure the trade cartels will be okay and find a way to make some money still.
Yeah, I should note that it's still worth, if you get a great watchstone with really good sextants on it, it's probably still worth splitting it, because that way you get to essentially duplicate the sextants that way. So there's still quite a lot of uses.
You just can't do it for the rest of the league. So on talismans, and kind of like looping into this is the idea of the value of dropped rare items as well. So it's changed now so that they drop anointed, but they don't use the affix rolling 2.0 system, which caused them to drop a lot better. Now, thanks to the new affix rolling system, alongside the implicits that talismans have implicitly, and the random anointments, which could be really good ones, really valuable ones, the effect was that talismans became one of the few rare items that I was really interested in looking at on the ground and picking up and looting and potentially being an upgrade, as opposed to crafting or trading for my upgrades. There seems to be a bit of a goal that Pee-wee's striving for, to have rares become more relevant again. So I'm curious why the pullback away from the Loot 2.0 system for talismans then.
So there's a couple. The first thing to note is that the well-rolled mods thing isn't meant to be a Loot 2.0 thing, right? The well-rolled mods thing is not for it's not the item decluttering system, which is a separate thing that we've got going on. It was implemented for heist, because when you finished an entire heist and you get offered one or several rare items to pick from, we want to make sure that they're not just complete trash, because it is true that you can look through quite a lot of rares before you find something. So it's a lever that's available for us changing how drops spawn. With talismans, the original intent of a talisman is that it has a powerful implicit mod, and it has random, with normal weightings, explicit mods that cannot be changed. It's corrupted, right? So the normal experience with a talisman is you find one that's got a good implicit, and you're using it because of the good implicit. The explicit mods are going to be worse than what you have on a regular amulet, because that's just how talismans work. And of course, the god talismans are the ones where you get a good implicit, and also luckily get good explicit mods on it. So that's the original design intent for the item. Now, we found that, obviously people weren't using these and they didn't like them, and our options were to just dramatically increase the implicits on them. But we realized, we've got this concept of anointments, why don't we throw those on? And so we added anointments, hoping that it would make talismans usable. And I guess somewhat defensively, the decision was made to also juice the mods a bit, because that's new tech that we had available, which certainly helped. But that's basically data that we have now. We know we don't need to actually do that. And we have to be careful with how we generate rare items in the future, because this is all working towards the grand decluttering project, which involves us essentially generating multiple rares and picking the best as far as the mods go. And there's no need for us to double dip here with talismans. As you say, talismans were an incredibly exciting thing to find because you were very likely to get an upgrade. Far more likely than any other type of item in the game, because they were just so skewed towards good ones. And that's bad from an expectations point of view, and also it's just different to all the other items in the game. So we're fixing that while
Decluttering
understanding
project
that we do
means
actually need to finish the
reducing the
decluttering
amount of
project,
loot
which
that
is going to-
drops. Less trash.
For those who aren't aware, basically, you get a lot of drops in Path of Exile, and we're essentially finding a way of turning item quantity into rolling multiple items and dropping the best ones instead. So in a situation where you clear a map and have 400 rares on the ground or whatever, that's going to be a much lower number of rares, but it's equivalent to seeing more than 400. So instead of having to ID 7 swords and see if any are good, you'll be IDing 1 or 2 swords, which are equivalent or better than the 7 that you previously would have seen. And so this is something we're working towards, because there's a lot of items in Path of
less
Exile,
trash
and this, of course,
and more
affects
good ones.
the whole clicking thing, where players are saying they have to pick up a lot of stuff. Obviously, if there is a more reasonable number of items falling, then there's far less clicking involved there. It probably has an effect on performance with rendering all the items on the ground and so on. I mean, a small effect, but every item is technically a draw call for the item and for its shadow. So reducing the vast sea of white items on the ground certainly helps. And so that's a project we're working on, but it's also a dangerous one, because right now you're used to seeing a lot of items and you ID them and they're generally bad, which is okay because you're not meant to get an upgrade every area. But if we say, okay, items are better now, and we reduce it a lot, so you get far fewer items and you ID those, and those are also still all bad, which is okay because you're not meant to get an upgrade every area, you'll say, what is the point? You've just given me far less items and they're still bad. Because it's hard to tell the difference between 2 random distributions that aren't spitting out 10s at you, if you see what I mean. And so we want to make sure we do this in a way where the game still feels very compelling to find item upgrades without making it too easy as a result, in order to bribe players to like the system. Anyway, we'll get it sorted out, but that's basically a project for later this year, hopefully.
It is an interesting psychological challenge because, like, on the surface, it seems like a great idea to reduce the items, and I'm really looking forward to that. And I hope that it does work out really well, but it's an interesting, like, concern that it might not end up feeling right.
It's one of those things where if we did release it with Path of Exile 2, is this is how items work now. Look, there aren't that many of them, but look, there's a fun game where the progression is good and you're finding compelling rare upgrades and everything is balanced around it and have fun. Things would be 100% fine, right? You can pitch it wherever you want to on the rare power curve and the game still works. But we have a game right now where players have expectations to get upgrades at a certain pace. And if we just said, look, the new reality is upgrades are far slower or something, that wouldn't be acceptable. So we have to make sure that the power ascension of items is similar to how it currently is. It's just done through players not having to read as many items per area.
PoE2 does seem like a good time to do that change, but is there any chance like this loot squish thing is happening potentially earlier than PoE2?
I think it needs to happen earlier, and I say that because we want to actually make sure it's good by the time PoE2 is released, and this is something we can, like, I don't want to jeopardize the launch of PoE2. I would much rather get feedback from players and try to solve problems. Like, I sympathize with the fact that people say they have to click a lot, right? And sure, action RPGs are about picking up items and clicking, but there's a lot of items in Path of Exile, more than there should be. And so that's something that we probably need to address. And players have raised the whole, maybe it affects performance, and undoubtedly everything affects performance. That's not the primary reason for fixing it, but it certainly helps to, reduce the sea of items on the ground and just readability and approachability. How would want Path of Exile to feel approachable to new players, and if they look at a guy playing a map with the sea, like the floor is entirely covered with items, and that's with the loot filter on. There are many reasons why we do need to address it earlier. It just means we have to do it in a way that's careful to not cause players to feel that we've wrecked drops in the game, even though our goal is equivalent or better item power from drops.
Since you mentioned that, like, people randomly seeing the game thing, I'm just curious why there isn't like a cap on character size in regards to Headhunter. Why do we get Shin point of view Headhunter characters instead of just like, I don't know, 3 times the size characters? Just still impressive. Just curious.
I don't know why there isn't a cap on it. 1 second. The team says there is a cap now in 3.14. Well, there you go. Look what you've done, Ziggy.
What?
You talk.
I did it. I killed Shin point of view single-handedly. It's all my fault.
Right there. They're live editing the game as you're suggesting stuff. What else would you like changed?
I did it. I'm not even sad if people are gonna be mad at me for that. I'm sure there's like some like small portion of players that's like, I love Shin point of view.
I will make sure that that's listed in the patch notes under a section called Ziggy nerfs.
Yes, perfect. I'll own that. Oh, great. I did want to ask about the like rare rolling system. It was used in ritual on certain items, right, where they would have the better rolls. Is it potentially used on the rewards from
Ultimatum?
Ultimatum? That's the one.
Yes. It is, and that's because this is a case where we say to you, this is the reward you'll be getting, and if that's a random rare with normal odds, people will look at it and say, I see 1,000 random rares in a typical play session. I don't care about your item. Whereas we're going to show them some good items, and they're going to say, I'm going to risk everything, and then they're going to die, and then they'll be angry, and we'll laugh.
You'll laugh. I know you will. Is there anywhere else you're looking to add that system, like to, I don't know, like certain league specific reward pools, blighted pustules, things like that?
It's generally cases where it's not okay to drop a pile of items. I would rather generally drop a reasonable number of items for players to choose between, but in the case that we have to present them with one, then we'll make sure that it's a compelling one. And things like the display cabinets in Heist, or the items in the ritual window, or the ultimatum offerings, those things there, we don't get the ability to give them a whole screen full of stuff to pick from. So I like the garage sale thing of going through a bunch of things and trying to work out what's best, but we use the well-rolled stuff in order to offer people a single item. Now, of course, we'll be doing decluttering to make sure that when I say you're going to look through some rings to find out what's best, I'm not talking about 400 of them, but we'll hit a sweet spot.
That was my earlier Path of Exile League currency making strategy, to look through hundreds and hundreds of rings and amulets. It's changed a little bit over time. There was some mention of Vowel Skills. Will we be getting any new Vowel Skills?
There are no new Vowel Skills in this expansion, but one could argue that if you're taking a Vowel skill that was previously barely used and making sure it is good enough to be used, then that's essentially the meta introduction of that skill. So we're hoping to see more use of the worst skills. And a lot of this is, like, we look at the characteristics of the Vowel skills that are used, and those are ones that have a lot of damage and cheap soul costs. And so we thought, well, what if we give a lot of damage and cheap soul costs to the other ones as well? And so I've been told not to oversell this. Do not hype them too much, Chris. These are just numerical rebalances. Be very careful. But it's exciting, guys. Be excited.
Good job. Good job.
He didn't
Well,
listen.
the messages.
He didn't listen.
I'm kidding.
He's the
changes will be
CEO.
good.
He doesn't
They'll make
have to
more
listen.
Vowel skills be
They work for
usable.
him.
And of course, there's new ways to buff them with the new Atzeri base type changes and so on. So it should be pretty exciting.
I know. Now chat's going to be
Not too
dandy
exciting.
excited.
On the other hand, very exciting.
If I'm not the one doing the live stream next time, then you'll know what happened.
You're not allowed anymore.
Hi, this is Bex, and I'm not going to let Chris say dumb shit.
He said the S word.
Oh dear.
Hey, Bex.
I'm telling, he said the S word.
Okay, where am I? I'd like to ask about something near and dear to my heart. Can we expect any new quality of life improvements, particularly in the realm of reducing the number of clicks in the game or player strain?
We're looking into QOL changes we can make, and we try to surreptitiously wrap them into each release that we do. So there's bits and pieces. Nothing click or strain related in this expansion, and that's partly because I want to try to tackle the decluttering as a way of really solving it. Like, I don't feel that suddenly action RPGs shouldn't involve clicking on items to pick them up. I think that that's been fine for a couple of decades, and humans' physiology hasn't changed. But I do completely acknowledge Path of Exile has way too many items to pick up. So yes, we will solve this probably by that method. I also have a pretty firm belief that it's important that in order for something to matter to players, it has to have some degree of weight in the game, right? That's why items have, the Tetris thing going on in the inventory, and why you've got to go and stash them in specific places, and things have to have identity, and clicking on them in order to pick them up is an important part of that. So I wouldn't want a thing where as you run around, the items are automatically scooped up into your auto-managed spreadsheets that you can, export to Excel and so on, which is kind of the way that goes. That's a bit of a slippery slope thing. But yeah, people having to click too much, we need to address that. And whenever we're dropping currency, for example, we do ask, what are some reasonable sizes here? So you get a few stacks to pick up. We make sure to fix it so we're not dropping pennies everywhere like in some leagues. We are very consciously aware of that. But I think a lot of it's going to come from decluttering. And we're not afraid of making QOL changes, right? A discussion we're having soon is what QOL changes can we make? And it's, it's good to keep pumping those out, just the right ones rather than the ones that we're kind of badgered into doing.
The Perandus coins are like a perfect example of picking up pennies, where you'd get Perandus chests that drop like literally 10 or 15 piles of 2 pennies.
Sure.
Obviously, those are being increased now as part of the Perandus change. But like their piles being condensed, since those are things that can like super easily stack.
I'll make sure that we're not having 10 or 15 piles to pick up when we're doing the
Fantastic.
changes here, because that does sound unreasonable.
I beg you. Another one would be like, I noticed, so I'd been like tracking my clicks a little bit in PoE. And one thing I noticed was like a lot of my clicks are coming from transferring small items from my inventory to my stash. It's a lot better now that I don't have to change tabs every time I want to transfer something, so that happens automatically. But is there any like possibility of being able to do that sort of stuff in like fewer clicks to transfer over to your stash? I've already picked the item up and felt its weight at that point.
A fair argument. There's some technical considerations with moving multiple items at the same time we'd have to look into, but that's something I'll discuss with the team. No promises, though.
I promise I would patiently wait and watch the items go tuk, 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 over from my inventory. Probably be really satisfying, actually. I look forward to hearing more about it. As I said, it is something close to my heart a little bit sometimes. Question about the breach stones. So now that we can use blessings to upgrade our breach stones, it's going to be a lot easier to get pure breach stones.
Yes.
Is the XP getting nerfed from those at all?
No.
Okay. Well, there you go. Lots of XP. We've got a lot more community questions now that have piled up. I've woven a few in at relevant
Yeah,
points.
I would
Thanks for
love
asking the questions, folks.
potions
We have
lasting like
Buse
15
asking,
seconds.
what was the change in the life pool showing leech or something? So the life pool was doing
That way I can
very
click a little
perceptive
less.
doing some interesting things during a certain point.
Right.
Or have them
so you're looking at a
auto-fire
petrified
if
blood
you
skill
want.
there. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but this is the one where while you're on low life, which is now at 50% as the threshold, hits that you take will partly be applied instantly like normal and partly affect you over time. And so it shows two levels in your health orb, one of them being the level that's kind of trickling down to.
I like the sounds of that mechanic. There was also the like more low life-y stuff that's based around not having auras reserved. So we saw one character that had an aura on, and then at another point didn't have an aura on and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So there's a bit more playing around there with the idea of low life this league to check
Oh
into.
yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on here. We've got 8 new gems in total, and it really solidifies, but it both makes low life easier to maintain, safer for people, lots of different builds, lots of skills.
So you're telling me that I can go into this game and be a low
life
life?
by themselves, like a lot of the blood skills do, and also ones that count how much life you spend. And so it's a thing where you use the skill, and if you use it enough times, or other skills that consume life, then it ramps itself up a bit. And so there are a lot of different ways to build blood-themed characters.
There's like a ton of interesting details in these videos, so I encourage you, if you're interested in some of that stuff, to go back and watch the VOD. I've seen it 3 times now, so I've noticed a bit more and more each time. But particularly the skills section, if you're interested in that life stuff, because I'm pretty curious how that's all going to play out. Rodrigo asks, with the buff to Abyssuals, will other belt implicits be buffed to compensate? Or will Stygians be stronger again? Everyone's
shaking their heads at me.
That's a no. Stygians are the way to go. As has often been the case. Zisu asks, will there be a change in the amount of essences, or you simply want to change the power of them?
My understanding is it's just the power that's changed here.
Nice. Okay. It was regular essences didn't change apart from the tier 5 screamings being able to reroll things like a Chaosob now, right?
Screaming acts like a Chaosorb, and I'm pretty sure the changes are just to the high-end ones. Other than that, can you confirm that?
The corrupted ones, right?
Oh. Right. So they say there's numeric improvements to general essences. So this would have been a buff-focused balance sweep. And that's what we've tried to do here, is a buff-focused balance sweep to the rewards of the past leagues.
Interesting. Some of those are already like better than tier 1 of the relevant modifiers. So it'll be interesting to see. Maybe some of the ones that aren't are now to that power level or something. Curious to see. D General Lee asks, what will happen to Twice Enchanted Lab? A double reroll? Yeah, I'm curious about this. Will it present all 6 options at once, or will it be like the 3 options, you apply it to an item, and then there's another 3 options?
There's a little thing on the UI that's how many times you get to use.
There's some UI that says how many times you get to use the bench.
Ah, fantastic.
So my understanding is it presents you with your 3 plus 2 options, and you can, so your 3 plus the other base types options, and then you can pick it twice.
Yeah, if it was all at once, it would kind of be a little confusing, because you'd be like thinking that you're only getting 1 enchantment, but just more options. That'd be like a completely different mechanic.
Our past content reworks started with, let's make the labyrinth give you 3 choices. That was where that whole thing started. Then it went into itemized temples as our 2 headline features, and then so much other stuff changed. It was awesome.
I can't believe like how many of those things were like literally my exact things that I wanted to see, like the itemized temples. And I just wanted to like point this out, but the items dropping from the boss in the temple. So now like the items that drop from the boss that with the specific modifiers are based on the runes in the temple.
Yeah.
That's how I thought it worked when the league first came out, and I was really disappointed when it didn't work that way. So I'm glad to see that finally come back around.
It'll help.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing a bit more temple action now. Actually, I kind of wanted to. Beefcake Crunch asks, are there Atlas
Beefcake
tree
Crunch?
nerfs, i.e. the Harbingers? The Echoes of the Atlas passive trees.
Right. So I haven't seen the changes for this, so I'm going to talk generally speaking here. We introduced the system in the last league, and that means when it's introduced, there's going to be stuff that's wrong. So there's going to be stuff that had to be buffed a lot. There's going to be stuff that had to be nerfed a lot. And so I would expect fully to see some of the most abusive stuff probably toned down. And I would expect to see some of the stuff no one was picking to be more powerful. But I have not seen the changes, so I'm just making that up. Let me ask the team. How accurate is that?
Yeah.
They say, yep.
Something swapped around and stuff.
Yeah, so there are a bunch of changes. I mean, it's the thing we're learning about as we go. We make the system, we test it as best we can with our team of 150 people here, and then we dump it on millions of people online and see how they break it, and then they really break it, and then we can either choose to leave it broken, which is the wrong choice when you're running a game that's going to be around another few decades, or make some changes. And so this is version 2. It's still meant to be powerful and compelling, and we'll see what people think.
Awesome stuff. A bunch of people spamming in the chat are just spamming flasks. So I'm guessing they're curious if there's going to be any flasking changes.
No flask changes in this one.
I assume that's the idea of like pressing flask frequently, which is something.
Yeah, we're very aware of the feedback. We just don't have a change to make at this stage, and we don't want to make like
Yay.
small changes that don't really fix the problem or whatever.
Yay.
Gotcha. Molinoff asks, is there a fix for group Maven witnesses and invitations, changes to syncing progression, nerfs to 6 players earning progression, etc.?
Don't think so. We'll look into it.
Yeah, so there's like a few questions around the idea of like multiplayer Atlas progression. Having done quite a bit of that now, there's like some stuff that works really well and other stuff that is a little awkward. So I think it's kind of just stuff that needs to be looked into across the board for a few.
This is prompting some conversation with the designers, so we'll make sure that we look into that and have a look. No promises that that's ready by next week's release, but yeah, it'll certainly be something we investigate later.
Yeah, awesome stuff. I feel like it's at an awkward point where it's starting to become quite good for party play, where things are working. So then it's really jarring when certain stuff doesn't work.
Yeah.
So looking forward to seeing more about that then. Mbu asks, can you ask? I will. Is that all? Will fractured items get a similar treatment like split items? And you 5-to-1 vendor fractured items for clean bases? I guess that might also apply to split bases too.
Oh, so one of the team members has just clarified that there's a change for the Uncharted Realms invitation. Only the map owner gets the witness rather than everyone in the party. That's in 3.14. And someone else says we're changing so the capture of bosses in Uncharted Realms isn't shared. It's only the owner. Right, okay, fair enough. So that's one change there.
Okay.
With regard to the fracturing bases, I don't know of any changes there. No.
Every person's
changes
weird,
to the
Corbin.
fracturing
Tom.
stuff.
That's what makes us
Chat
unique.
is very
No one's
excited.
like
Thanks for the
everyone
extra
else. We
detail,
all have our
background devs.
quirks and
No worries.
things that
I
make
always
us
love to like stand on
special.
the side and talking to the background
I
devs.
would
So good.
not dare do one of these by myself.
I would never change that aspect of the Q&A. I love it when like one of the devs randomly like kind of pops in and mentions some things, or you like bring Neon over or something. I love those moments. Sekna asks, what are your thoughts on migrating hardcore leagues to SC leagues to encourage people to try out hardcore?
This is one of those things that sounds really good at face value, right? Like, I'm a hardcore player, and I would absolutely love it if I can just keep playing in the equivalent standard league. But historically, the reasons why we didn't do this was that we felt it would be demoralizing for you to be playing standard, taking it seriously. And by standard, I mean the standard current challenge league, taking it real seriously. And then some hardcore player appears above you on the ladder, super angry that he's now in your trash pool of a league, blah, 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 blah. You see? And maybe that's just a psychological thing, but that's the reason why we had it so it goes to real hardcore, to real standard when a hardcore character dies. There's also the thing where hardcore is meant to be impactful. Like back in the day in traditional action RPGs, when you die in hardcore, you lose your character, just gone. You can't log in, right? Here we have it so you can keep a shrine to your character in standard league. And I get it, that's basically useless for a lot of players. They're never going to actually go and play that character in standard. But there is meant to be a consequence to death, and I kind of feel that the type of player who would start to play hardcore because Standard Challenge League is their fallback plan is probably not the type of player with a temperament to really enjoy hardcore for what it is. And so I don't think we're going to change that in the near future. But yeah, it sounds good at face value.
Envious and myself coincidentally ask any updates on racing, community events, and things like race seasons and stuff like that. If you didn't know, people, there was Path of Exile was featured on GDQ recently for the first time,
awesome.
which was super exciting and really awesome job. And Taitai Killer set a world record.
Yeah, congratulations, Taitai. That was awesome. In terms of racing updates, we're just slowly working towards our goal of having a integrated race system, and we're trying hard to support community events. If you're running a large scale community event, to get in contact with Bex and the community team to try to arrange some stuff. And so racing is important to us. I know I said at ExileCon that 2020 would be the year of racing, and then that got shut down by a number of external factors. So we're trying to support it as much as we can, but we haven't yet got spare development resources to put a lot of push into the racing stuff. Hopefully soon, we'll begin to be able to roll out some improvements, though.
I'm going to start a custom now where every one of these Q&As I ask, is there going to be any word on Path of Exile Royale?
One day. Ask me again in the next one.
Okay, I will.
I know, because you just said you would.
Ziz asks, any quality of life updates for fishing?
We never patch no those.
Yeah.
Fishing stuff was certainly hinted at in the video somewhere, among all the other things.
I saw that. You got the vendor recipe wrong. You clicked accept on the wrong vendor recipe, by the way. It didn't work. Just saying.
4 people have tried it already.
All right. Thank you very much, Chris, for the Q&A, and thank you, chat, for all the questions.
Great questions, everyone. Hope you really enjoy Ultimatum.
Awesome stuff. All right.
Oh,
we'll
God.
see you guys all for Bay Class soon with Rory. But that's it for now.
Such a slow-paced Q&A. But lots of good information. A lot of good info. But woo! Pace of that was brutal. I feel like I'm going to fall asleep. A lot of information, but with a very soft-spoken host, and a very soft-spoken question and answer with lots of information. It was very go on for an hour, and I felt like I'm going to take a nap now. That was a lot. Whew, okay, wow, that was fun.